So welcome everyone to Being Celtic Podcast, where we explore ancient wisdom for modern times. And I'm your host, Emer Stassen. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Jane Burns. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Emer. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here today. And let me introduce you to our viewers when they're watching this. Jane, you've studied core shamanism, soul retrieval, and shamanic teacher training with Sandra Ingerman, Celtic shamanism and fairy doctoring with Tom Cowan. And Jane, you became a shamanic practitioner in 2005 and a teacher of shamanic journeying in 2007. And you're also a Celtic Reiki master, and you bring your practice of over 20 years of experience into the fields of psychic and medical intuition, energy medicine, and past life regression therapy. And you also teach the course of Celtic Shamanism, which is where I came across you, through the Shift Network faculty, where you've been a member since 2019. And your book, Up a Tree, a novel and shamanic handbook, is available on Amazon, as is your new Celtic oracle deck that I came across called Portal to the Sacred Trees, which sounds divine. So thank you for being here, Jane. And I thought we could start with, we were talking before I started recording about the title Celtic Shamanism. And would you like to share more about what is that? In a nutshell.
Well, it's really the study of the Celtic indigenous experience and history, how Celticity began, and really what that is in its spirit and in its purity. Shamanism is the oldest healing and spiritual practice in the world. And we believe, through anthropological studies, that practice was first observed or believed to have originated from the Tungus region of Mongolia and the Sami people. And the word itself is taken from that language in order to honor the origin of this practice that has been observed to be part of indigenous cultures all over the world. And one of the things that anthropologists have observed, which is so fascinating and so wonderful, is that there's enormous overlap from culture to culture to culture in the rituals, in the practices, the ceremonies, the deep and abiding love that the indigenous people had for the land, the ways in which they explained the mystery of the world, of who they were, their fascination with that, their wonder and awe, their belief in the divinity in all things, the interconnectedness of all things. And we observe this and hear this in the myths and stories and practices of cultures all over the world that have been studied. Some of those cultures are still practicing. It's an unbroken tradition, like in the Peruvian culture. And a lot of people have gone to Peru and have studied with teachers who have had the teachings passed down to them in an unbroken line. But for most cultures, with the introduction of imperialism and organized religion, that changes. And a lot of those indigenous practices go underground, or they're co-opted and embed themselves in a sort of secret underlying way in organized religion that's practiced even today. But I think, one of the things that's unique about the Celtic expression is how strongly it still resides within the heart and the spirit of the Celtic people, even though they, converted to Christianity quite readily, actually. They embraced, Christianity very willingly. And they kind of made it their own. I mean, early Celtic Christianity is very, very different from the Christianity that we see coming out of the Vatican. And the Vatican sort of held sway after a while with its understanding and its practices of Catholicism and of Christianity. But within the Celtic heart and vision, their way of seeing and being in the world, they still hold to that idea of the immanence of God in all things. And they shunned the idea of original sin because they like to embrace the idea of the divinity and purity of the human being, rather than this idea that the human is inherently flawed. So with the term Celtic shamanism, what we're doing is we're taking this overall global study, what we call shamanism, of indigenous cultures, and we're training that lens on the Celtic lands and observing how it is that the ancient Celts lived a shamanic type life, and how does that arise in their stories, in their practices, in their prayers, their blessings, their way of being. And it's everywhere. I mean, it pervades the culture. And one of the ways in which that's true, I think, is, and this has been observed as far as in the study of indigenous cultures, is that the indigenous cultures are much more imaginative. They're much more right brain. And oftentimes their language itself even reflects that. The formation of the language, the speaking of the language, its tones and its syntax expresses a very different worldview than one which we have now in our modern world, which is very left brain oriented. We want formulaic kinds of things that makes our life feel predictable. If this and this, then this. We want things that are scientific and explainable. And we're anxious to have that explanation. We're not content to remain suspended in the wonder of unknowingness, which the ancients were very comfortable in that. That was a blissful state for them because it filled them with awe and it filled them with reverence for the divine and all that was yet to be known. The mystery, embracing the mystery and surrendering to that. It's very difficult for us to surrender. We're feeling this right now during COVID-19. The question that everybody keeps asking is, when will this be over? We don't like this suspended animation. We don't like the unknowing. And, some of those practices of surrender and acceptance and just a quiet observation of what is, not questioning why it is so much as just observing it and taking it at face value. You and I were speaking earlier about Rumi's poem, The Guest House, and how, it's just this idea of like taking everything as it comes and accepting it just as it is, greeting them all at the door laughing, whether it's a joy or a depression or a malice, some kind of misfortune, this idea that it all comes with a blessing and a very important wisdom. And if you're not there and awake and anticipating, what that wisdom is, you might miss it. So I feel for my own work that teaching Celtic shamanism is a huge contribution to our modern way of living. Encouraging us very gently and very simply to turn back to these traditional ways, to the traditional ways of being in the world, and being more at peace with the way things are, anticipating more the beauty and the wonder of things, and focusing, more heartily on that than we do on what's wrong and what's missing and what's gone awry.
Yeah. I really love all that you say, and absolutely we must turn back to these traditions and reconnect with all of this. And as you were speaking, I was wondering what drew you, or what draws you then to Celtic shamanism?
Well, as you said earlier, I mean, when I first started studying shamanism, I was studying core shamanism, which is really the study of the phenomenon of shamanism itself in the world globally, and how that moves from culture to culture to culture. And it's really just core shamanism is really the study of the overlap. What's common among all of these cultures and all of these traditions, and you find things like the shamanic journey or certain beliefs about the divinity in all things and the interconnectedness of all things. And so it's really a study of that, but you really gain so much more when you start focusing on a tradition and really stepping, closer to that. My heritage is Celtic, so it had enormous appeal. It just speaks to you on a different level. It speaks to your to your bones and the fibers of your being, where all your ancestral DNA lives, so it was kind of a no-brainer. I started studying Celtic shamanism with Tom Cowan in 2004. And, I mean, it's the kind of thing that just draws you in. You want to learn more of the stories. You want to look more at the practices. And because it is considered to be a broken tradition, although I think we could argue that to some degree, but because it is a broken tradition, you really have to go searching a lot. You have to look deeply into the Celtic lore and into the history and into the traditions that even exist today, and keep pulling back the curtain and seeing, where did this come from? What was the sort of the original state of mind that gave birth to this particular myth or this particular practice? What was it addressing? What urging and what passion and what yearning within the hearts of these people did it satisfy? Even the deep, deep love that the Celtic people have for their land. I mean, it's unmistakable. And I think, and again, even in modern times, this is not something that has died out, by far. You think about the fact that the relationship with the land is the heart and soul of a given culture's spiritual practice. And it's also the heart and soul of their identity. Everything comes from that. Their sense of who they are in the world, their stories, their language, their identity, their ancestry, their relationship to nature, their relationship to whatever they determine is God or the divine. It all arises out of their relationship with the land. And we've become so divorced from the land. We don't see it as a source anymore. The grocery store and the bank and our employer, those are our sources. And those are the things that we, I guess, honor and give reverence to. I don't know, but it's had a very strange effect on our psyche, as a world globally. And you can see it because of global warming, because of what's happening now with COVID-19. It makes all of that glaring. The fact that we have broken our love of the land and our connection to it, our communion with it, daily communion. I mean, they would go out and speak to the land. They would honor the land, and just even in the way that they tilled the land or harvested the land, it was always with enormous gratitude and devotion. I mean, think about that. If that was a part of your normal day, how differently you would look at the world, at yourself, at your family, at your future, at the world. I mean, it's staggering, so.
Yeah, it's so beautiful and sad at the same time of how disconnected we have become as a society. And returning, how can we return to the land and reignite this relationship with with the land.
Yeah. Well, I think it really comes through reigniting our love of nature and really beginning to see ourselves as part of nature. You know, we've lost that sense. It's like there's nature, and then there's us. There's human beings, and you know, it's such a strange and schizophrenic point of view.
Yeah.
And when we see ourselves as part of nature, and we live as if we are in constant communion and communication with that, honoring nature, honoring its beauty, speaking to the nature beings, invoking their protection, invoking their wisdom, their guidance on an ongoing basis. You know, it's just that alone that begins to return us to the Great Mother, you know, because she's the source from which all that comes.
Yes. Yeah. So beautiful. And while we're here in lockdown, actually, we live beside woods, and there's so many more. We're all working from home, so many more people going out into
Oh, I
nature,
think it's great.
into the woods, and it's so beautiful because all of a sudden we're all living and we're being in our houses, you know. And for those of us fortunate to be able to get out, we can. Um, and with this heart and soul identity that you talk about, um, specifically for the Celtic people, what was so or is so special about that, being so connected to Mother Earth?
Well, I mean, you certainly live from a whole different point of view. You're living from your imagination.
Mm.
You know, imagine what that would be like. Um, you know, where you are feeding your imagination, you're allowing and actually invoking nature and its beauty uh, to feed your imagination in an ongoing way that totally changes how you respond to what's happening around you. What you're then doing, if it's speaking to your imagination, you're responding with reverence, you're responding with wonder and awe and amazement, deep observation, gratitude, and also, I think, a generosity of spirit, because you have to be generous. We normally think of generosity as being something that's an outgoing thing. It's the things that we give to others. But generosity is also having openness, you know, a complete openness and allowing everything to come in, just like the guest house again.
Yeah.
That also is generosity of spirit. You know, it's a flow back and forth. And so when the Celtic people talk about the importance of generosity, and it is a very important virtue to them, that's part and parcel of what they're talking about. They're not talking necessarily and totally about what you do for others or how you serve the world, but it's also how open are you to what is and what is coming towards you and what is asking to be part of your life or asking for a response. And so it's a communication thing as well. I mean, you know, just even in the expression of blessings or the expression of gratitude in an ongoing way, um, you know, isn't that really what you're doing? I mean, you have this. It's like an ongoing love affair and relationship with the world, with the natural world. You know, I don't, for some reason, the there's a verse from a poem by Mary Oliver, which is called "The Messenger," and I think it's the last verse, and it says, which is gratitude for being given a heart and a mind and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren and the sleepy dug up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever. there's such a strong line. It's the reason why I like that verse is she's drawing that line, between that simple conversation and that simple gratitude and the largeness, the magnitude of our understanding of the all that is and how everything fits together and our own divinity.
Yeah, and I love that, and how that links to the, not trying to make sense of it in our heads. It's allowing the imagination to flow, and the wonder and
Right.
the awe and the not knowing.
Oh, absolutely. It's a
all
much more experiential experience, a much more experiential way of living life. And what that leads to is being in the present. We talk about being in the now and how important is that. It's really hard for us to be in the now because we're always in our heads. We're not living life as an experience, and once you can do that, you are paying attention to everything as it's unfolding around you. You're totally in it and you see yourself in it, not apart from it as a witness, analyzing it as we do in our left brain way, but really being a part of it. And that also is another thing that has separated us and has given us the illusion that here's nature and then here's humanity, and that we're not part of that. That's also part of that schizophrenia, is that we're not experiencing it, we're witnessing it, we're watching it. I mean, obviously, there's something, to be gained sometimes from witnessing, but we can't witness all the time, And I do feel, that witnessing is something that oftentimes we forget to do because we move to action. When something comes down the pike, what do I do? What should I do? That's where we go.
Yeah.
Watch it for a while, get to, some understanding of it, get to experience it on some level, and then you'll know better what to do or how to respond.
Yeah. Well, it's exactly where we are now, isn't it? In this collective worldwide pause.
Yeah.
And that's the questions people are asking. My children are asking, how long is this going to be for? We're going, we don't know.
Yeah.
And I was remembering when I took your Celtic Shamanism course, one of the modules was around marrying the land. Could you say a bit about that and the importance of that?
Well, the whole practice of marrying the land came from the idea that when the rightful king was chosen to rule the land, it wasn't that he took some kind of monarchic, position where it was all about what he wanted or what he deemed, should happen. Instead, he became a servant and a kind of consort to the goddess sovereignty, the goddess of the land, and served the land. So it's the recognition that the king is really a facilitator of, the goddess in bringing what her potential is to bring to the land, because that's how it was seen. Sovereignty was a force. It wasn't a woman or a being. Even though we're talking about, marriage, it was seen as the feminine, the marriage between the masculine and the feminine principles. But it was really seen as a force, that carried all this enormous potential to be many things, to give forth many things, to be that creative spark. And so how do you work with that? How do you align yourself with it? How do you revere it? How do you be in service to it? Acknowledge it, understand it, curry its favor even, so that it smiles upon you. And all of that was supposed to be the domain of the king. That was what he was supposed to be doing so that everything would run smoothly. And if he was a good king, the land was prosperous and the people prospered with it. And if he was selfish and he forgot whom he was supposed to be serving and was more self-serving, then what would happen would be that the people would suffer. The land would suffer and the people with it. So marrying the land is really, it comes from this old tradition where there was actually a kind of ceremony of sorts that was meant to represent the human earthly king marrying this divine energy which represented the source of all things, and promising to serve that for the benefit of the land and the people. But when we talk about it, when we use that term and that practice in Celtic shamanism, we're talking about something a little more personal. And it's not necessarily the marriage, our marriage to our land where we live, although it can be that. And I think that is important. It goes back to what I was just talking about before, of how we operate, kind of in our own little world, and nature's just sort of a backdrop, So, I mean, it does, when we do go out and we do in some kind of reverential, intentional way, commit ourselves to serve the land on which we reside, or, the land of our community, or the land of our ancestors, whatever that land is that we decide to, make that kind of vow to, that's that oath to serve it and to revere it, to honor it. That's certainly just that intentional act in itself certainly changes the game for us as far as, again, how much we feel connected with the natural world and how much we see ourselves as a part of that, which is only to the good. But the other level on which you look at the ceremony of marrying the land, or that phrase, what does that mean if I marry the land in my life? It can be construed to say, well, let's talk about the inner landscape. Let's talk about why each one of us is here, the mission that we intend to serve in coming to this life. This is a very precious opportunity that each of us has been given to be here in the world for this given lifetime. Let's make something of it. That's our intention coming in. We're not just here visiting. We do come here for a purpose. And it's to be part of that larger community and to make that contribution that no one else can make. It's our unique contribution. So coming into touch with that and committing to serve and honor that, that's big for us, because we find so many ways to get talked out of it and to talk ourselves out of it. In our conditioning, as we grow up in the world from childhood, we're really learning to serve the world. We're really the temporal world. We're learning to serve the expectations of others in order to be loved, in order to be protected, in order to be safe. And we learn this from childhood on, and we make accommodations that bring us further and further away from the true essence of who we are, what we really care about, why we're really here. And so children can be talked out of their imaginative ways because it makes them not pay attention enough in school, or it makes them, forget their backpack, Oh, I left it on the steps at the school. My poor son, my sweet imaginative son who could never remember anything, he would come home like without his, he'd have one sock. I'd be like, where's the other sock? I can never understand, how, like parts of himself would just like leave during the course of the day. And I think I was like very hard on him to try to get him to step in line and like keep track of things, you know. It's required in this world. But that's the kind of thing that happens to us as children, you know, children who are, you know, have this teeming, passionate curiosity, and their parents are like going crazy because they're asking so many questions, like, stop asking so many questions. And so we become conditioned out of these natural powers and talents and gifts that we have, that we came in with in order to do our work. And so if you're getting talked out of these things and they're dropping out of your backpack as you move up through your life, then you're serving what you think people want of you, what the world is asking of you, what will make you a success, what will make you accepted in the community, what will make your parents happy, you know, and you end up on this track and on this course, and it's like, whose life is this? You know, people wake up, this is what midlife crisis is about. People wake up one day and go like, where am I? What am I doing? Who are these people? You know, there's this understanding that you're not living your truth. You're not living your authenticity and who you are. So marrying the land in a Celtic shamanic way as a practice or as a ceremony, as a laying down of some intention in your life, is that point when you stand and make an oath to yourself and also to your soul, you know, that source within us. And the Celts would say it surrounds us, the soul surrounds us. And so the thing that's carrying us through life, so to speak, our vehicle, you know, it's the making of a vow and a promise and an oath to that part of ourselves to say, from now on, all of my choices will be related to the honoring, to the putting, to the bringing forward, to the midwifing and the birthing and putting out into the world this part of me that came in to serve. And a lot of people are really, really befuddled about what that is. You know, the clients who come to see me for sessions, for shamanic healing sessions, that is the question that most people ask. I would say, you know, probably up in the 90%, what am I doing here? What will bring my life meaning? What is the legacy that I, you know, intend to leave? Because people don't want to live meaningless lives. They don't want to just mark time. They want to do something while they're here. They want their life to have meaning. And so marrying the land is about really doing that soul searching and that investigation of our inner landscape. Who am I? Why am I here? What do I really care about? What do I love? You know, as far as like the kinds of things that I love to do. I see that all the time in my work when I'm restoring soul parts that were lost, you know, 5 years old, 8 years old. And there's usually some homework that comes with that the helping spirits give to the individual to help them to integrate that soul part and bring it back and allow it expression, because that's what's happened. It's gone offline. It no longer has expression. So you bring it back online, you retrieve the soul part. What does it need to do in order to put its voice out into the world? And, you know, sometimes the helping spirits will say painting or horseback riding or, you know, writing or, you know, making things. And so I'll say to the person, you know, do you draw or do you paint or something? And they'll say, oh, I used to love to draw when I was 8 years old, but I don't do that anymore. And so the homework is, well, start doing that again, because that's going to help sort of work the muscle of that part of you, which will only lead you further down the road toward what you came to do here in the first place. Even if it isn't painting, literally, it's maybe a way in which you can start looking at the world differently, spending your time differently, honoring yourself differently, knowing yourself differently, that then leads to you coming more into contact with what it is you came here to do and having the courage to put that out in the world. It's the scariest thing that we do as human beings, is be our authentic self and do the thing that we came to do and say the thing that we came to say. So hard for us. I see the loss of voice more commonly than anything, because that, again, that's something that gets conditioned out of us when we're children. How children have these, they say these incredibly wise things and the adults don't want to hear it, you know? And so they silence that precociousness and that wisdom and that those psychic insights that that child has. And that gets tucked away, that gets lost and goes offline and is no longer accessible to that individual who may well need that voice and that wisdom and that psychic sensibility, that strong intuition and imagination in order to do what they came to do. Wow. So that's what Marrying the Land is about. Marrying the Land is about vowing just even to know the land, vowing to explore the inner landscape, to know the self more deeply, and then to begin to speak from that self and act from that self, make choices from that self, create from that self. And that changes everything. You know, that's a huge game changer.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And how you speak of the outer landscape where we're living, you know, the land we're living on, and also, most importantly, our inner landscape, and some really beautiful questions that you're offering, well, to me and people watching this afterwards as well, to really walk with and get creative with, to reconnect fully with who we are, why we're here. And I was thinking as well, as you were sharing that as an example, the piece of homework of painting, it's very experiential, isn't it? And presencing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which brings us back into the presence that we so need.
Yeah. And it releases us from the temporal world, you know, because we totally go into right brain. We actually go into a meditative state when we are creating. It's the reason why somebody's painting or they're, you know, making pottery or whatever they're doing, and all of a sudden they go, oh my God, it's 3 o'clock. You know, it's like they've completely lost touch with time in the temporal world. They're experiencing, they're in a process now. They're living from their imagination. I think just in general, you know, people get this idea like, oh, I'm not creative. There are creative people and there are non-creative people. Everyone is creative. We're creative beings. We have to be. So what is it that you want to create? Here's another thing that's happening right now is everybody's homebound. People are making things. They're making things as a family. They're sitting around the table making masks, you know, or they're painting together, or they're, you know, doing art projects, or, you know, whatever. And it's really a wonderful avenue for self-discovery. You know, it gets us off the hook and pulls us out of the temporal world so that we can begin to really focus on ourselves. What do we think? What do we feel? Because all of that comes out in the creative process.
Yeah. Yes, and as you share, having that courage to share our voice, to voice that and birth that into the world.
Yeah, it's like the last thing we want to do, because it's the thing that we learned growing up made us not belong.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we really, really want to belong. But the price that we pay for belonging is really, in many ways, the extinguishing of ourselves. Because we keep cutting off all of the parts of ourselves that make us unique. Oh, this makes me stand out. Let me get rid of that, you know.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about belonging is that it's almost like when you stop thinking about belonging and you just say, I have to give this up because it's more important that I speak my voice, that I say what I need to say, that I do what I need to do. That's more important. If I don't do that, it's going to kill me. And so I'm going to just put belonging, which has always been my number one, I'm going to just put that aside. The interesting thing that happens is that people, when they become authentic, everyone wants to belong with them. You know, because it's so attractive. Come on. You know, and so people like, you know, they're looking like, oh, I'll have what she's having, you know, because they can see the passion, they can see the groundedness, they can see, you know, the power of it, you know, how the power is just channeling out of this person as they're operating in the world. And they're not looking around and they're not saying, you know, oh, well, I hope you like what I just said, or I hope you agree with me, or I hope you won't shun me because of what I just said. They don't care about any of that. They're saying it because they have to say it. Yeah. And that's where we need to go. But it takes enormous courage.
Yes. Yeah. And time, you know, this is a journey really, isn't it, that we're going through in our lifetime.
It's many journeys, actually.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Many journeys.
Yeah. And something else is the, you know, the Celtic aspect and shamanic aspect of the wheel. And you speak of the Celtic Medicine Wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to share more about that and how the idea of the wheel might very much help us now in the times we're in?
Yeah, I mean, the Celtic wisdom wheel is I think it's very unique. I mean, again, here's something that from shamanic culture to tradition, you find this phenomenon of this idea of looking at the wheel as a structure that sort of explains the outer world, but also explains the inner world, because that's one of the basic principles of Celtic shamanism, is this observation and this understanding that the ancients had, that the within is the without and the without is the within. You can't pull them apart. And so any kind of construct like that, it's explaining the outer world, it's explaining the movement of the sun throughout the course of the day, the seasons of the year, the passage of time, like, you know, parts of a life, like, you know, childhood, youth, you know, maturing, eldership, you know, it observes all of this kind of thing that happens with the passage of time and how things change over the course of time and how time changes things. So it's that observation, and it's about being in step with that. Now, the ancients were always in step with nature. So, you know, springtime, because they're observing everything that's going on around them. That was a time for, you know, because everything was starting anew, that was a time for them to start things anew, you know, as individuals and possibly as a tribe or a community. And in the end of summer, then it was harvest time, and you brought in all the stores, and then you went through winter, and winter was a very internal time, because not only were you sort of disconnected from the harshness of the elements as much as you could be, but you were also going within and really doing your inner work, and investigating your inner landscape a bit more. You had more leisure to do it, just like we have more leisure to do that now. And I think it's one of the reasons why some people are really uncomfortable. When's this going to be over? When's this going to be over? Because they're being forced to really look at themselves and look at how they're reacting and look at their discomfort, because it's unrelenting and they can't get the relief from it that they used to be able to.
Yes.
I mean, I guess to some extent you can, you know, have a couple glasses of wine or something, you know. You don't have to think about how uncomfortable you are anymore. But anyway, so the wheel is this inner and outer construct that explains who we are as individuals, but it also explains how the world around us works and how we can be in the same rhythm with it. So the Celtic Medicine Wheel has really 5 stations on it, the 4 cardinal directions and what's called the sacred center. And it's unique, I think, because each one represents a kind of experience. We might call it experience, or we might even call it an aspect of life that calls upon our deeper self and calls upon maybe even a honing of certain virtues in order to align ourselves with what is available to us at each of those junctures on the wheel. So in the east point, the gift of the east point of the wheel is prosperity. I mean, here we're kind of back to that marrying the land and that whole idea about how you are in service to the creative potential within you in this case. Because that is what was given to you as a gift when you came here in order to make yourself prosperous in the world, right? To support yourself, you know. And so what is required in that juncture is the virtue that's required here is generosity. And here's that definition of generosity as both an outgoing thing, how we serve the world, but it's also about being open to the world and how it acts upon us, because the way in which the world acts upon us will inform us who we are. It will test our mettle, it will grow our strength, our determination, it will give us wisdom. And so we have to be open to it. We have to have that generosity of spirit. When you move to the south point, the gift of the south point is music. How do you align yourself with that? And that's about being in a state of wonder and awe. Music was said to be a gift that came from the other world, that it wasn't from the temporal world, and that the gods gave music to human beings so that they wouldn't become too discouraged by the difficulties of temporal life. It would give them a release and a relief of some sort, which not just music, but really any kind of art or creative endeavor, creative expression gives to us. It heightens our experience. It pulls us out of the mundane. It says, yes, you know, life can be very rigorous and life can be very arduous and difficult, but there's also so much beauty. Look at all this beauty. And when we focus on that, that's the thing that lifts us out, of the daily mud of life.
Yeah.
So how we align ourselves with that is in being in that state of wonder and awe, that state of inspiration, allowing ourselves to be inspired, and then in turn, giving that gift of inspiration to others, lifting others up. And so in the Celtic tradition, you see things like not just music and song and poetry, but you also see the giving of blessings, you know, the acknowledgement of how we are all so blessed by the sun coming up every day, by the beauty of the flowers, by the call of the bird in the tree, or, you know, the passing of the clouds across the sky, the gorgeousness of the trees that are blooming now, all the fruit trees. And so it's this constant observation and taking in of all of that beauty, honoring it and praising it, communing back with it, and praising the tree for its beauty. I think of this practice that I learned from Tom Cowan called Gonconic, and it means love talking. And what it says is not, when you translate it, it's not, I love this tree. It's, you are the tree of my love, which is a whole different, look at the syntax of that and how it changes the whole meaning of everything. And so being out in nature and doing this practice of Gonconic, where you're acknowledging all these nature beings who are turning out their finest for you, whether you want to acknowledge that or not, they are. And nodding and saying, yes, I see you. I see what you're giving to me. I see your beauty, and you admire it and you praise it. And then in turn, because you feel blessed by that, you turn and give that blessing to others. And so you wish for them, the song of the bird, or the power of the snake, or whatever it is, you wish that for them and give them that blessing. And that's how you align yourself with the South Point, so that gift then is coming strongly to you. When we move to the West Point, the gift here is knowledge. And again, this is that comfort. We talked about this earlier, the comfort in being in unknowing, in being curious, in being investigative, in being open and saying, inform me, show me what I need to know. This point is commonly associated with the sea, and the sea venturers who would go out in their boats onto, into the element of the sea, which was known to be unpredictable, was known to be mysterious. You didn't have the control you had on the land. The sea just took you where she wanted you to go, and you just had to agree. You didn't have any choice in the matter. And so there was this idea about going out into the sea, really having no destination in mind, just seeing, what will I learn? What will happen? And that the sea would provide those lessons, would test your mettle, would make you into, a stronger, wiser being in the world. But it also, of course, it's really being open to all of life experience and saying, yes, this is harsh, and yes, this was uninvited, but it will teach me something. It's here to teach me something. That's part of Rumi's poem too, and what he says about why you need to welcome everything in, because it's come along from a long distance to teach you something. And so having that appreciation, again, just being so open and not closed and frightful, and I don't want to learn anything else. I just want to live my little predictable life. Life is never going to allow you to do that. One of the things that I find so interesting right now is that, life, everybody's saying, oh, well, we don't know what's going to happen. When did you know what was going to happen? I mean, it's no different than it ever was. It just is more obvious now. That's all.
Yeah.
So let's move to the North Point. The North Point, the gift is battle, which I always say that doesn't seem like much of a gift, but again, in keeping with this same idea about how these things that test our mettle make us stronger, make us more powerful, make us wiser, mature us, bring us up in the world so that we are capable of great things. How else are we going to do that? And so the battle is really about the battle within, and that same struggle that I talked about, that how the courage that is required of us to speak our voice in the world, to put ourselves out into the world in the way in which we were intended to, and it's the hardest thing that we have to do. That's the battle within, because we find 100 different ways to talk ourselves out of being who we are. And so the virtue here that we want to cultivate is courage to speak your voice, courage to do the right thing, do the thing that maybe even seems counterintuitive, but somehow in your soul, I must do this. I must quit this job. I must move here. I must leave my marriage. I must whatever it is that you decide, I must take to the sea. If that's what you must. But it's having the courage to do that, and the conviction, and saying, I can't turn away from this anymore. I can't live another day ignoring the truth of who I am and my own authenticity. And then we come to the sacred center, and the sacred center is the gift of all that work that you've done, along those cardinal points. The gift here is sovereignty, which is rulership over your life, rulership over how you put yourself out into the world, what choices you make that are in keeping with the yearning of your own soul. that is the voice that you answer. That is the call that you answer, not the call of the world, but the yearning of your own soul. And it's about, it really is about, where are you going to give your allegiance? Here we go back to the marrying of the land and the king giving his allegiance to the goddess sovereignty. This is you giving your own personal allegiance to that longing of your soul's yearning to be your authentic self and to bring to this life what it is you came to bring. And really, everything comes from that. And I oftentimes say, it all comes down to sovereignty. When we talk about anything, feeling that we're in a time, an adverse time, or feeling that we don't have control over our lives, or feeling that we don't belong, or just name it, just name any struggle. It's all about sovereignty. Where is my sovereignty in this struggle? What did I do with it? How did I give it away? How do I get it back? And again, it puts you in that same position, that Rumi talks about in the guest house, where you're standing at the door and you're just beckoning it all in because you're a sovereign being, and that you can deal, and it's all a gift, and it'll all be fine, and that you're only going to benefit in the end. Only a sovereign being can say that,
Yeah, that's just exquisite, all of that. And I was sharing before we started recording, it's very Celtic or Irish. It's like, open the door, of course you're welcome. But
yes.
in my head, I'm going, no, you're not. But yeah. Yes, of course you are. Come on in. Have a cup of tea.
Right. No, hospitality is so important to the Celtic people. Yeah. And it is. It's generosity of spirit.
Yeah.
Making a place at the table for everyone and everything.
Yeah. It's just exquisite. Yes, yeah, very exquisite. And there's one more question I wanted to ask you before your poor cat is calling for your attention.
You can't hear him because I can hear him. He's making a lot of noise back there.
It's like he's serenading us quietly from the background.
He's good for that. He's dependable in that regard.
Well, actually, one question actually around sovereignty. Would you call something I refer to as inner power? Would you say that's the same thing as sovereignty?
Yeah, I would say it's one aspect of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, sovereignty, it boils down to everything. It's about being in the present. It's about being in the flow. It's about, kind of being able to call upon whatever it is that you need to call upon in a given challenge, in a given struggle, in a given situation. Because sometimes a situation calls for you to go into witness mode and for you to just stand back and observe. And sometimes it calls upon you, for some kind of action, that you have to make a stand, that you have to bring your voice forward. Sovereignty is the knowing what it is that you have to do in that moment in order to honor who you are. So it gets into so many things. And even when people start talking about things like soul loss and, possession and curses and some of the things that intrude upon our personal power, as we, bang and collide against other forces in the world and other people in relationships trying to get what it is they want and so on, and we lose part of ourselves. We know that we lose part of ourselves all the time in so many ways. Sovereignty is about the power to have that never happen. It doesn't even occur. Yeah. And when I teach what we call in shamanism the dark arts in Celtic shamanism, I keep bringing it back to sovereignty because that's what it is. It's all about sovereignty. How sovereign are you over your physical space, over your energetic space, over your voice, over your identity in the world? Everything. and if that is strong, if that is sovereign, it's impenetrable. You can't be diminished, not by what happens in life, not by other people's dramas or what they need or their narcissism or whatever comes your way. You are impervious because you're sovereign.
Yeah. Wow. It's like a journey back home to sovereignty.
Yeah. I mean, that's why it's the sacred center.
Yeah. Beautiful. And one last question I wanted to ask you about. I've heard people saying that this time we're in now is like, it's like we're collectively grieving or being called to grieve. And something you're teaching in Celtic Shamanism is around death rites and keening.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, could you say more about, well, grief and what the Celts recommend?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of spiritual teachers, and observers of the human condition, have said for many, many years that a lot of the struggles and the global issues that we have to contend with in our world are really the result of unmetabolized grief that has just been passed down from generation to generation as a result of war, of ethnic cleansing, of poverty, of loss of the land. Loss of the land is so huge in its impact on an ancestral lineage. So you take this idea, first of all, that we already have this global issue of, as I said, of sort of collective unmetabolized grief that has just been passing down from generation to generation and has been proliferating. And what you have happening now is really kind of a manifestation of that, sort of the objective correlative of it, to show us. And I think it's really interesting that for the most part, the illness affects the lungs, which is, where we, express and hold grief. So keening as a practice, which they're trying to make a resurgence of this, and I really hope they do, because it's just a beautiful and very necessary practice. But the ancients understood this. The ancients understood that when someone died, their spirit could no longer remain in their body. Then the grief that the survivors had for that experience, for the loss of that individual, also could not remain in their bodies. Wow. And so the practice of keening was meant to kind of evoke and pull that out in its wild and unbridled expression of the depth of that torment. So what they would do is they would, there were these women called Bon Quincha, and they would come in, and it was their role to keen loudly, to wail, to beat their breasts, to rent their clothing, to throw themselves in, on the grave, to scream, much like my cat has been doing the last half hour. And the idea was that the power of that, the resonance of that, was actually erupting and evoking and pulling out, unspooling the grief that was being held by those who were gathered around the grave, by those for whom this person was a loved one or a friend. And oftentimes the Bon Quincha were not even from that village. They would travel from village, they might not even know the person, but they are acting out, they were enacting this collective grief that had been visited upon the village by the passing of this dearly beloved individual. So because of the extinguishing of these kinds of practices that became very archaic and were considered, by the church, certainly, the church really felt like that those older practices and the Bon Quincha would sometimes steal the thunder of the parish priest. And so sometimes they would refuse to show up. And the family would be torn because they would feel like, well, you can't give this person a proper send-off if you don't have the Bon Quincha, but at the same time, we got to have the parish priest here, to get the person buried in the cemetery. And so, so they would, they would have to make a choice sometimes, and sometimes the keening woman would come separate from the burial. They would have like a separate kind of, like at the wake that night, or wherever. She would do her keening. But people who have been in attendance, at a funeral or a gravesite where there has been someone keening, they said the tears just pour out. They just come unbidden. There isn't even any thought to them. It's almost like it just excises all of the grief that's being held collectively by that group of people. It's such a beautiful idea and a beautiful notion that we've become very divorced from. We value now in society when people keep a stiff upper lip and they don't cry. Look at how much admiration, and I don't take anything away from Jackie Kennedy. I thought Jackie Kennedy was an amazing person, but how much adulation there was for Jackie Kennedy because she never shed a tear throughout the whole. It was I'm just giving that as an example because it was a very public, globally public funeral, and everything was, was just very, prim and proper. And again, it's not spoken out of criticism. It's just to observe that this is valued in our culture. If you can manage as a survivor to get through the whole funereal process of your loved one and never shed a tear, is so that you don't make other people uncomfortable, I guess. I don't know what that is, or you don't lose your dignity, God forbid. That's something to be admired. Well, there's a big price that we pay for that, huge price that we pay for that. And, psychotherapists and the whole, psychological community have observed, for years, this kind of, I forget what they call it. It's like grief syndrome or something something like grief syndrome, where it actually, because the person was not able to grieve properly, it goes off into all these other things and creates other manifestations of, it could be insomnia or nervous disorders or depression, chronic depression, things like that arise out of the, this one circumstance where the person was unable to really express and honor, as it should be, their grief. But it was also necessary because it honored the soul that was dying, and to some degree it ensured the proper passing of the individual. So even in cases where maybe the individual was a troublemaker, in the village, they still would gather and would praise. They would do these laments where they would praise the life and praise the individual, because that was meant to actually lift the soul into the other world. You didn't want to not give proper transmission of that soul, because the detriment would fall on the community going forward. Mm-hmm. And so again, it was another reason why it was considered to be so important. It would be lovely to see those practices come back.
Yeah.
We're uncomfortable with them. I mean, it sounds very macabre if you listen to some recordings of keening women, and people are like, oh, that's like weird. But it's, you have to think about what is underneath it. Yeah. And when you think about what it's facilitating, it's actually an incredibly beautiful, and also really, here we go back to generosity, a really generous thing that is being done by this woman who is taking it upon herself to, to facilitate this rite.
Yeah. Yeah, and my mother talks of the band Quincha and the Wailing Women. She remembers.
She remembers.
Yeah, yeah, and I think, in Ireland, I've been to lots of funerals, and they're hugely sad, but also great fun as well. So, I wonder if we still have the idea of the wake and staying with the body,
Yeah.
as well. And there's lots of drinking and singing and
There has to
talking.
be both. I didn't mean to imply, if I did, that it's just like all sadness. There
Oh,
has
not
to
at
be
all.
both,
Yeah,
because you really are celebrating that person's life. And a lot of times, if someone is, if they're in the process of dying over a period of time, it's not a sudden or accidental death. They will sit, and their friends will come, and they will reminisce about their life, and they will honor their life, and honor all of their relationships and everything that they contributed. And that's part of what goes into the lament, that is sung for that individual. And so it's absolutely essential to celebrate what it is that life has been and what it has left as a result.
yeah, and so poignant and powerful that for each person connected in the community, in the village, that is removed, that they release that as well. They're part of that grief and that grieving process. It's really beautiful. Yeah, well, thank you so much. This podcast is around being Celtic and how we can draw on ancient wisdom for modern times. So as we wrap all of this up, is there anything else you'd like to share for viewers for the times we're in now?
Well, I mean, I think I go back to what I was saying in the beginning about, just the whole, shamanic way of being. Let's talk about it more from this idea of being Celtic. I think it's about living from your imagination. And so however you do that during this time, is it spending time being more creative? Is it going out more in nature and really not just walking, getting from point A to point B and back to the car again, but really communing with the trees, really deeply listening to the birds, just even feeling the wind, blowing through your hair, or, watching the trees as they wave in the breeze, the clouds passing overhead. I mean, whatever it is, just being deeply, deeply observant and really living from your imagination. What feeds your imagination? I mean, I think that if we asked ourselves that question every day, as I think that the Celts probably did, it makes us make different choices about how we're going to spend the time of that day. And so, that alone, I think, is something that will hold us in good stead through these times and through the times beyond these times.
Yes, into the new world that we are moving into.
Hopefully creating.
Yes, yeah, I hope so, yeah. And what feeds your creativity, your soul? I think it's really, really beautiful questions you offer. Thank you so much. And where can people find you?
My website is www.journeysthroughthesoul.com.
Beautiful.
So they can find me there.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Jane. I've loved this conversation.
Thank you, Emer. It was just a delight to speak with you today.
Thank you so much. Let's talk again soon.
Yes, let's.
Thank you.